We're watching Syrian President Ahmed Al-Sharaa, who had been designated as a terrorist by the United States up until last Friday, playing basketball with US military. Now, soon after shooting some hoops, the Trump administration lifted the terrorist designation. Now, soon after shooting some hoops, the Trump administration lifted the terrorist designation, even though Al-Sharaa was in fact the leader of an Al-Qaeda offshoot in Syria known as Al-Nusra. And he is, or was at least, part of the very terrorist group that carried out the worst terrorist attack on US soil, September 11th, 2001. Those terrorist attacks carried out by Al-Qaeda. So why would we host an Al-Qaeda terrorist, or supposedly a former Al-Qaeda terrorist, here on US soil? Why would he be pictured cozying up to the Trump administration? Now, if you think this is a gross betrayal of the American people, Trump wants to ease your nerves. There's nothing to worry about here. See, last May, and through an executive order, of course, the president lifted economic sanctions against Syria. Now, you might be wondering why, considering the fact that a former Al-Qaeda terrorist is now the president of Syria. Well, after meeting Al-Sharaa for the first time in Saudi Arabia in May, Trump called the Syrian leader a young, attractive guy, tough guy, strong past. Strong past? Strong past. Let's talk about his past a little bit. Tough guy with a strong past. Okay, so look, in anticipation of the US invasion in Iraq in 2003, Ahmed Al-Sharaa was recruited in Damascus to fight the United States in Iraq. Now, that recruitment was very appealing to him because he did, in fact, join Al-Qaeda in Iraq in fighting our soldiers in that country, in that war that we shouldn't have started in the first place. Let's be clear about that. Of course, Iraq had nothing to do with 9/11, but nonetheless, you have this young Syrian guy, this young attractive guy with a tough past deciding to join Al-Qaeda and essentially fight our soldiers. Now, he joined AQI, which is a particularly brutal affiliate of Al-Qaeda, and the group was later renamed the Islamic State of Iraq, or ISI. Now, AQI was even reprimanded by Al-Qaeda leadership in 2004 due to the amount of bloodshed the affiliate was responsible for. So this affiliate apparently went too far even for Al-Qaeda leadership. Al-Sharaa quickly became, again, part of this Al-Qaeda affiliate. And in about 2005, he was captured by US forces and detained. Later, he was released, and he spent much of his time when he was behind bars, essentially plotting to overthrow Bashar al-Assad, the former leader of Syria. And guess what? He succeeded in doing that, obviously with the help of the United States. And I'll give you the details on what the United States did in just a minute. But as Syria descended into civil war in late 2011, the newly released Al-Sharaa approached Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the leader of ISI, for aid to form a contingent of Al-Qaeda that could take part in the uprising. Now, this is during the civil war that's playing out in Syria. He's very much engaging in it, and he's engaging in it as part of an Al-Qaeda affiliate. Now, Sharaa formed the conspicuously named Nusra Front in early 2012 and recruited young Syrian fighters who were not aware of his connection to Al-Qaeda. The Nusra Front operated for nearly a year before the United States expressed concerns over its ties to Al-Qaeda and designated it a terrorist organization. Now, the Nusra Front carried out many acts of terror and extortion against the Syrian people, civilians in particular. They taxed civilians, another euphemism here, that's really extorting them. They looted factories, they conducted kidnappings, they held hostages for ransom. That's basically how they made their money. And giving his first interview back in 2013, Sharaa made clear that the Nusra Front intended to impose a fundamentalist interpretation of Islamic law, Sharia, across Syria, and that there would be no room for religious minorities such as Shias, Alawites, Christians, or Druze. And in fact, there have been some killings taking place in Syria under his leadership of Druze, of Alawites. But in 2015, after Russia prepared to essentially intervene in that proxy war in Syria, on behalf of Bashar al-Assad, in order to keep him in power, of course, Al-Sharaa changed his tone and became a lot more conciliatory. And in 2016, he showed his face for the first time and essentially announced that he was breaking ties with Al-Qaeda. So all is good, I guess. He broke ties with Al-Qaeda back in 2016. I guess we can just forget about what Al-Qaeda did to the United States. Then he persuaded other rebel factions to essentially fall under his command in a merger referred to as Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, or HTS, which also committed horrific acts of torture in Syria. Now, the US even put a $10 million bounty on Al-Sharaa's head. You're looking at an image showing that this bounty did in fact exist, but it was rescinded after Al-Sharaah's HTS helped topple Bashar al-Assad, a regime that the United States was interested in toppling. So that led to a shift in US foreign policy towards Syria, which Israel and Turkey were super jazzed about. Turkey did annex portions of Syria, so did Israel, but Israel has other motivations in mind that I'll get to in just a second. Now, yesterday, the former Al-Qaeda terrorist visited Trump in the White House, and Trump had a fascinating take when he was asked by journalists about Al-Sharaa's past. Take a look.
We want to see Syria become a country that's very successful, and I think this leader can do it. I really do. I think this leader can do it. And people said he's had a rough past. We've all had rough pasts, but he has had a rough past. And I think, frankly, if you didn't have a rough past, you wouldn't have a chance.
A rough past with terrorism? We've all had rough pasts? I don't know. I think most people don't have a rough past that includes killing innocent people or fighting against American soldiers in Iraq. I'm just gonna venture to say that. Now look, before I continue, I wanna be clear about something. I'm not looking to go to war with Syria at all. But I'm also not interested in having anyone that has ever had any relation to Al-Qaeda here on US soil. It already happened a few weeks ago during the UN General Assembly when Al-Sharaa was welcomed with open arms by the Trump administration in New York City, of all places, where of course the 9/11 terrorist attacks happened and killed thousands of our own people. How about we don't do that? And more importantly, how about the Trump administration explain to the American people why it is that all of a sudden we're willing to forget the fact that this guy engaged in terrorism, had a $10 million bounty on his head, and was in fact part of a terrorist group that carried out 9/11. Like, how about you explain to us what changed? The problem is, if the Trump administration came forward and was honest about that, well, the American people probably wouldn't like what they're gonna hear. So I'll do it, because I think it's important for people to know. Because our relationship with Al-Sharaa has nothing to do to benefit the American people or this country. It does have to do with what's currently transpiring in the Middle East. So I'll get to those details in a minute, but the White House wasn't the only place that Al-Sharaa visited while he was in the US. According to reporting by The Dissident and other media sources, of course, during his trip to Washington, Al-Sharaa met with Republican Congressman Brian Mast, the pro-Israel congressman from Florida. There he is, pictured with Brian Mast. So again, why are we so quick to forget about what Al-Sharaa has done in the past, especially considering, again, the terrorist organization he was affiliated with? All you have to do is really pay close attention to what is being said out loud by various people, including the former US ambassador to Syria. His name is Robert Ford, weighing in on why President Trump is so horny for positive relations with a former Al-Qaeda terrorist. Take a look.
Why is Syria so important? Why do you think it's been taken so seriously as a dossier by the Trump administration?
I think the Trump administration in the Middle East is still very concerned with the counterterrorism dossier. And so Syria plays a big role in that.
The Trump administration is concerned about counterterrorism, which is why he's cozying up to a terrorist to engage in counterterrorism. But later Ford says the quiet part out loud, which I really appreciate. Take a look at this.
I think the Trump administration in the Middle East is still very concerned with the counterterrorism dossier. And so Syria plays a big role in that. I should include there Hezbollah and Iranian influence. The Trump administration, it takes a tough line on Iranian influence in the Middle East, as did the Biden administration and the first Trump administration before this Trump administration. Sharaa is vehemently against Hezbollah influence in Syria. That's another area where the United States and Syria can cooperate. And because Sharaa is against Iranian influence and Hezbollah influence in Syria, that is a plus for Israeli national security interests.
So this is about Israel's national security interests. That's the national security that our government here in the United States is concerned about. I mean, obviously we have all sorts of issues here at home. Obviously the idea of cozying up to a former Al-Qaeda terrorist is an insult to the American people, considering how the 9/11 terror attacks, again, killed thousands of our own, ended up dragging the United States and our military into decades-long wars in the Middle East. We currently have soldiers, veterans, who suffered very real consequences of multiple deployments. PTSD, limbs missing, ailments that they'll have to deal with the rest of their lives, for the rest of their lives. But hey, we're concerned about Israel's national security. And by the way, that's the country, if you don't remember, that has the nuclear weapons that they're pretending like don't exist. You know, the nuclear weapons that any other country, if they had it, they have to be part of the non-proliferation treaty. Not Israel though. They're not part of the non-proliferation treaty, but they're the victims always. They're always the victims, they're always unsafe. And so it's really, really important that the United States cozy up to, I'll give them this, I'll take them at face value, a former Al-Qaeda terrorist on behalf of Israel's national security. It's unbelievable to me that this is happening. It's happening right in front of our faces. And there's a portion of this country that's like totally providing cover for it. How is it not insulting to have a former Al-Qaeda terrorist on US soil in New York City at first, and then weeks later in Washington, D.C., in the White House, playing basketball with members of our military? And then people get real upset when conspiracy theories about 9/11 start to swirl. Because here's the thing, when you see that our government is so quick to forgive someone who is part of Al-Qaeda, you start to wonder, I mean, did Al-Qaeda really carry out this attack? I believe they did. I just think that there is like no telling how low our government will go on behalf of Israel. They will make nice with former terrorists who were part of a terror group who carried out the absolute worst terror attack on US soil, if it means that they can broker some sort of deal that will benefit Israel and its national security. But we went way further than that, guys. I don't want you to think that, oh, the US was just kind of staying out of Syria, and then organically there was an uprising and a civil war. That uprising, by the way, began as something organic and then was exploited by foreign actors. Now, the US certainly exploited the initial organic uprising against Bashar al-Assad in Syria. And how did they do that? By arming terrorists. So I want to give you some details about that, because in the book, The Fort Bragg Cartel, journalist Seth Harp wrote the following. In March 2005, dozens of neoconservative pundits close to President George W. Bush, as if acting on a single cue, had simultaneously begun to speak of their hopes for an Arab Spring, a populist uprising that would topple or weaken Arab governments across the Middle East and North Africa that were unfriendly to Israel and America. He also added that Washington's efforts to overthrow Bashar al-Assad, who, like Saddam Hussein and Muammar Gaddafi, was an outspoken and belligerent foe of Israel, redoubled amid the Arab Spring protests. And we actually had a covert operation taking place in Syria. It was a CIA covert operation, one of the most expensive programs, covert programs in US history. It's $1 billion program with the code name Timber Sycamore. According to the dissident on Substack, or I'm sorry, this is actually from the Fort Bragg cartel book that I was referring to earlier. I'm gonna read it verbatim. So one of the most expensive CIA programs in history, a $1 billion fiasco codenamed Timber Sycamore, plowed thousands of tons of guns and ammo fresh from German and American factories into Syria in an effort to arm the Sunni portion of the population that had long chafed at the brutal and corrupt rule of the House of Assad. Then in 2012, get a load of this, the United States actually blocked a peace deal that would have ended the civil war because it wanted to carry out regime change and get rid of Bashar al-Assad, which eventually they succeeded in that. An internal email on WikiLeaks written by then advisor to Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, Jake Sullivan, bluntly states, quote, Al-Qaeda is on our side in Syria. Anything for Israel, anything for Israel. And I thought this moment from Al-Sharaa's interview with Fox News yesterday, by the way, you wanna talk about softball interview. You should watch the whole thing. Super softball interview, it was pathetic. We're talking about a literal former terrorist and they conduct a softball interview while everyone seems to be hell-bent on absolutely destroying Tucker Carlson when he actually did push back against Nick Fuentes when he interviewed him. But anyway, that's beside the point. This moment really caught my attention. Take a look.
Has President Trump raised with you, discussed with you, your own past affiliation with Al-Qaeda terrorism?
I think
this is a matter of the past. Now, we did not discuss this actively. We talked about the president and the future. We talked about the investment opportunities in the future.
Do you, Mr. President, have regrets that Al-Qaeda carried out those attacks that killed 3,000 Americans?
I was only 19 years old, so I was a very young person, and it didn't have any decision-making power at that time, and I don't have anything to do with it. And Al-Qaeda was not present right then in my area. So you're speaking to the wrong person about this subject.
No, I don't think she's talking to the wrong person. See, if I were conducting this interview, I'd say, nope, I'm talking to the right person. The US is now cozying up to you. So I would like to know, why were you part of Al-Qaeda even after the 9/11 terror attacks? All those thousands of deaths of innocent Americans didn't discourage you from being part of Al-Qaeda. Why is that? And the fact that President Donald Trump didn't talk to him about his terrorist past in private conversations is telling, especially as this guy goes around, our president goes around and talks about how hot Al-Sharaa is. He's a good looking guy, tough past. And look, none of this should be surprising. In fact, aiding and abetting terrorist militias seems to be a hobby of the United States and Israel. In fact, Israeli papers, including Israel Hayom, report that the United States is turning to the anti-Hamas militia known as Abu Shabab to maintain order in Gaza. That's interesting. Now, he's the leader of the Popular Forces in Gaza, has admitted on the record to looting the humanitarian aid that Gazans so desperately needed. And by the way, Popular Forces are armed in Gaza thanks to the Israelis. Now, the 31-year-old Abu Shabab, a previously unknown member of Gaza's Terabin Bedouin tribe, escaped prison around October 7th, having been imprisoned since 2015 for drug-related charges. Drugs are reportedly smuggled into Gaza through Egypt's Sinai and, according to analysts, are run by ISIL-affiliated groups. This has led to a widespread belief that Abu Shabaab has ISIL or ISIS links. But Abu Shabaab's alleged affiliation with ISIL has not been an issue for Israel, and apparently it's not an issue for the United States as well. Right now, the Trump administration is trying to convince you that we're making nice with Al-Sharaa in Syria because he's gonna help us fight ISIS. So if that's the case, why are we arming a guy with links to ISIS in the Gaza Strip? Just curious. The reason why people believe in conspiracy theories is because our own government is lying to us. They're making nice with people who have harmed us in the past. And they will sell us out at a drop of a dime to please Israel, to please their donors, to please themselves. This government does not care about us. And I'm not talking about a partisan issue here, because Biden was just as bad when it came to this issue. So that's what we're dealing with here. I hope Al-Sharaa enjoyed playing basketball with members of our military at the White House yesterday. We as Americans should demand more from our government. The reason why we get treated the way we do is because we allow it to happen. We allow our government to convince us to fear, instill so much fear in our minds that we give up our civil liberties in the name of national security. And then years later, the very heart of what led to that fear, the very terrorist group that led to that fear, all of a sudden, all is good. All is good. It's crazy, man. But that's the reality of this situation. So I don't want to hear from anybody who claims that Zoran Mamdani is a dangerous jihadist, but has been super silent, or even worse, has provided cover for the Trump administration, again, cozying up to a former Al-Qaeda terrorist.
Every time you ring the bell below, an angel gets his wings. Totally not true, but it does keep you updated on our live shows.